Good afternoon, James.
Hi Jane, great to be with you today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for agreeing to chat with me about your journey and your history. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Look, I was raised in the United Kingdom and I've lived in Australia and become an Australian citizen recently. I've been here for the past 4 or 5 years. I love Australia. Australia is very much home for me. A little bit about my previous history. In a nutshell, I'm one of those people who I was abandoned at birth. I was fostered in an orphanage for a time, then adopted into a wonderful family, a very loving family. I was adopted with a twin sister. I have 2 older brothers and an older sister. So there were 5 of us, 5 years apart. So it was very much a tight-knit family.
Mm-hmm.
I would have said that my life was very normal. I was raised in a Christian home. And really, it was only around the age of 14, 15 did things really start to disintegrate within me. Now, I was a clever kid. I was always top of the class, in most things at least. But at about the age of 14, I contacted the Lesbian and Gay Switchboard and I said, look, I think I'm gay. And I was told basically, yes, you are, this is what you must be. And therefore I took that on as an affirmation of some of the doubts that I had within myself. I was particularly effeminate. It was pretty obvious to many of my friends, and had been for a long time, that actually it was very likely I would be gay. I took those words really of affirmation at that age to heart. It was only when at the age of 17 that I came out to my parents, first of all, and then to people at school and said, I'm gay. And they were very accepting, very loving. To some extent, they weren't that bothered. They kind of knew already. And from there, I then went to London at the age of 18. I threw myself into the gay community. I then became very active in the gay community. I saw it as my role to proclaim very much that this is the way we are, this is the way we're born. Particularly the churches have got to understand this is the way God has made us, and to back off with anything religious whatsoever that might even begin to question how we've been created and made. I ended up, for a time, being promiscuous, and then I ended up in a long-term, committed gay relationship. It was in that relationship that I came into another relationship, a deeper relationship with the person of Jesus Christ. I was looking for more love. Who isn't? In some way, this was an appendage to my life, if you like. I got a beautiful boyfriend whom I loved dearly. He loved me dearly. And so Christ, in a sense, was a bit of an addition to that. What was interesting about this relationship, though, is as I began, in a sense, to ask what I now understand is the light of the world to come into my life, I began to see things very, very differently. Now, my boyfriend liked the changes in me, so much so that he became a committed Christian as well. Not only did he become a committed Christian, but we became in some way this model gay Christian couple in many ways. And we thought we got the best of everything, to the point that we were actually considering having a blessing over our relationship. We thought it was that great. We began to grow more and more in our spiritual life. And the challenge became this, is I began to see, as this light is shining in a sense into my mind, into my heart, that my boyfriend was trying to find something in me, a mystery in me that I was trying to find in him as a mystery. And that deep, deep down, and I've only got these words later in life, but deep down we were both looking for a sense of who we were as men, and neither of us had it. I came to a point where I realised, as I began to be drawn more and more towards the person of Jesus Christ, and the peace that he was giving me, and my self-harming was going down, my alcohol consumption was going down, my sense of dignity was going up, my sense of peace within was rising, which is what my boyfriend had found attractive to begin with. And I knew really that actually the pathway of following Jesus Christ was making me well. And that being in the gay community wasn't really deep down making me well at all. I made a choice that I thought I could flip back on if I needed to say, I'm going to leave the gay community behind for a time. And I literally cut off from my relationship as well. All I can say is this in the midst of that relationship, is that as I cut off from that, and I began to walk with a group of others who also admitted their own brokenness and their own vulnerability, and the challenges that they too had in their own lives, is I didn't feel like I was suddenly this gay guy, but I was just equal to everybody else. They'd all got issues, I'd got some issues, we've all got issues. But we walked together towards the primary focus of a relationship and a God who loved us. And that began to uncover all sorts of things from my past. I began to look at my adoption issues. I began to look at what it was to have been fostered and moved from place to place. I began to look at what it felt like primarily, the sort of primary wound of having been given up at birth. My primary wound was, if my mother, the woman who bore me, doesn't want me, how could anybody else want me? And I was testing the world in every relationship. Am I going to be rejected? Am I going to be rejected? And what happened in Christ, in that relationship, I found a sense of I belong and I belong for eternity. That changed everything for me. Changed the very way I saw myself. It changed my mind. And what happened then is I began to go on to a therapeutic journey, and very much a spiritual journey alongside that, where I began to address learned behaviours. I began to address inner vows within my own mind. And I began to look at my responses to different environments. For me, trust had been broken in so many places. In the midst of this spiritual therapeutic journey, I came to a realization as well that actually I had been sexually abused, not just by a teacher between the ages of 8 and 11, but by a friend of the family consecutively at the same time. I'd also been introduced to pornography at the age of 8. So by the time I was 13, 14 and called the lesbian and gay switchboard, I'd actually become saturated in a sexualization that I did not know how to process as a child or as an early teen. There was no wonder therefore I was addicted to this stuff by the time I was 17, 18 and of course being in the gay community, I say of course, but within the gay community pornography is very accepted and quite rife. So I was living in this eroticized world, and it was only when I cut off from the gay community was I able to draw a line in the sand and say, what does a world without eroticization look like? And it was there I began to come to the understanding that there isn't just one type of love, which is erotic, but that there are 4 types of love. There's a God's merciful, unforgiving love called agape, that there is a parental love, if you like, an authoritative, boundary love called storge, where we learn about boundaries and individuation, etc., small children. There's another love called philia, that beautiful love, particularly between people of the same sex. That's why same-sex relationships are fantastic, and God rejoices in same-sex relationships. But I don't believe He's designed for them to be erotic and to have an erotic expression. That erotic expression is left for a later stage, from puberty onwards, particularly for the nuptial relationship, through dating, then romance, and ultimately through the covenant of love, and to be expressed within a marital relationship itself. I'd never heard any of this. I'd never learnt anything about this, but that was the journey that I found myself on. What does, in a sense, did part of the restorative journey look like for me? Well, it looked the same for me as it does for everybody, irrespective of what their sexuality is or what their sexual attraction is. The restorative journey looked like this, is I had to take every thought within my own mind, everything that was critical of myself and critical of the situations around me, and I had to lay that before the Word of God and say, what does the Word of God say, this eternal Word say about my life? So where I felt that I was rejected or somehow I was second class, or that my life had been a mistake because I'd been conceived out of wedlock, that God was saying, no, your life has been born of my imperishable Word, not just of human sperm. But that God had called my life into being. And therefore, I had to take the thought that maybe I was a mistake and say, no, God has chosen that my life would be created. I had to take the fact that, I was so consumed in a sense with my, what I felt was sometimes was wrongness, or the fact I felt distant from God, and God said, I'm calling you to become a saint. I'm providing for you to be able to walk a journey of sainthood and holiness. Stop dwelling so much on being a sinner. So I had a vision to be able to see what my life could be like. I was taking an eternal vision, which was coming in a sense from the vertical, and not just looking at the horizontal vision of what the world was saying about me. So I had to learn to die to the words gay and homosexual. I wasn't asked to deny in any way my same-sex attraction, but I had to stop taking on worldly terms of how I saw myself. What I did have to do was to be able to lay my human thinking before divine thinking. And in a sense, we know it's true, God's foolishness is still wiser than man's greater wisdom. So I had to learn to lay every thought, every concept, everything about myself before Him. And it was like divine surgery would take place. It was like this knife, this double-edged knife that was coming and cutting away at the cancers and the tumours that I picked up through learned behaviour, through the environment around me, through the ways I'd begun to think of things, through the inner vows that I'd made within myself. And as they were placed before the cross, I was able to walk through from a place in a sense of darkness into a place of light, and to see, in a sense, a divine blueprint of who I should be. Clearly I'm a work in progress without a question of doubt, aren't we all? But that's what really happened for me. So it's been nothing short of an incredulous journey. I just never expected to be where I am today.
And so you were then married to a woman after that?
That's right. As I began to deal with some of the key issues in my life, as I began to address the issues around some of my sexual abuse and through the adoption and through the addiction stuff, what happened is forgiveness became paramount. As I forgave, and as I basically, as I began to cut away, in a sense, what felt like the tentacles of the world wrapped around me, as they were cut away, I was able to take on the bonds of life from the Lord itself, almost like an umbilical cord between me and the Lord himself. And what was shocking for me, I was the person most surprised by this, is when I stopped feeling this sort of gnawing sense of same-sex attraction. And for quite a time I was almost asexual, and I just thought chastity is easy. But then what happened, and this is what shocked me, is that I began to find women attractive. And nobody warned me about this, because everybody said to me, this is impossible because you're made this way. And of course I believed that that's how I'd been created, and I was telling people that as well. That was the gospel I was preaching, if you like, the word I was preaching to people. And the more and more I felt attracted towards women, I found myself then beginning to date women, to the point whereby I had a long-term girlfriend, and I said, look, you know, I want to commit myself in marriage to you. Before I could do that, I went on a journey to find my birth mother, and to find my birth father, and to face my abusers. And I went and met up also, and I was reconciled in a way with my ex-boyfriend. And so everything was about forgiveness. A lot of forgiveness was going on, and me needing to ask forgiveness for my wrongdoing and things that I'd got wrong, and me needing to forgive myself for some of the things that I'd done as well. And that led me over a decade ago to end up becoming married and to becoming a father. Today I have a beautiful daughter, which I give thanks for every day. I've since divorced, which saddens me, but I still know that whatever happens is marriage between a man and a woman is just something radically different to a long-term committed relationship between two people of the same sex. I would be a liar to try and pretend that they were the same and equal. They can't be, they just can't be. So even at this present time in Australia, my concern is that we are moving towards a legislation that is to some degree or other is actually hoodwinking people of the same sex to believe that they can have what a man and woman can have in marriage. And I honestly don't believe that is the case. And I'm concerned for my brothers and sisters in the LGBTQI community that they may be sold something that looks like truth but at its core is not. That is a great concern for me.
Yeah. So some people say that homosexuality is completely biological. What do you think about that?
If homosexuality were biological, then clearly you would find that identical twins would have the same genetical biology as they do, and therefore if one twin is gay, one identical twin is gay, then the other identical twin should be gay or manifest as same-sex attracted. And we know from numerous studies that is not the case. What I've also learned is this: I spent over a decade running an amazing support group in London. It was challenging, but I loved it, of walking alongside literally hundreds of people who were same-sex attracted. And what I found in walking alongside these people is that they all had a really similar story to my own. They'd all come to a place whereby they'd made inner vows, they got stuck in part of their developmental cycle, their environment had taught them to perceive the world in a certain way. They thought in a certain way, and literally, although I drank hundreds and hundreds of cups of coffee and listened to hundreds of stories over many hundreds of hours, I could have encapsulated all those stories into 5 or 10 minutes. And I began to see the very clear pattern. It was only after listening to many of these stories that I then came across a lot of earlier psychological work that began to explain all that was going on, much that we've now rejected and pushed away because it's become easier to believe, well, it's just the way people are, so we don't question anything. But does that mean, therefore, that people feel a greater joy and less depression and less mental anguish? No. In fact, if anything, today we're seeing a greater degree of mental anguish, particularly among people in the lesbian and gay community, partly because they're being told, this is all you have and this is all you are. Well, I know very clearly from my life and the life of hundreds of people, and I mean hundreds of people who've walked a similar journey to me, that actually their life isn't complete. There is a degree of inner work that they have to do, as we all have to do. It's not about being LGBTQI. It's the fact is that we live in an imperfect world that affects all of us. And that can also affect our sexual development. It can affect how we are sexually attracted, to what degree we're sexually attracted, how that might manifest itself, etc. So in the midst of all the tests that we've done, we still haven't found this gay gene. And I'll be honest with you, I don't believe we ever will. Because, say, literally, having walked alongside the lives of hundreds of people who are same-sex attracted, in a city of London where I work with all sorts of cultures, and every age from 18 to 80, and people have told me their story, and I see the same patterns in all these people's lives. And in some way, the same traumas, the same tragedies, sometimes the same joys. But I also see great insights in these people as well. Insights that I believe aren't being utilised to the best of their ability. So, for example, many people who've come to the point of admitting they're same-sex attracted, they've already done some incredible inner work that many human beings haven't. They've had to analyse and examine the very essence of what they're feeling and experiencing today. Most people don't know how to do that. But actually, what same-sex attracted people, I invite them to do, and this is certainly what I had to do, was to dare to go deeper. And in some way, it's as though we can become prophets of a new age, particularly an age where there's so much noise, so much white noise around us and things happening, that we don't know what it means to stop and to reflect and to say, who am I and where am I going? And particularly in the light of an eternal God who's made us. So, you know, there's great gifts in the gay community or in the LGBTQI community that could easily and need to be shared with mainstream society. But equally, there's a lot of insight in mainstream society that the LGBTQI community are missing out on as well. We are a common humanity. We can be a gift to each other. But the very way in which we become gift is we have to learn what it means to be humble. And I say this often, is regrettably the gay community is all about pride. And until that humility is embraced, in a sense we fail to be that common humanity. Therefore it always feels like we're different, and it always feels like there is division between us. And that's a very painful place for anybody to be in, particularly if you're only 2 or 3% of mainstream society. But going back to the question, do I believe that people are born gay? I would say that in the early 21st century, we should have found proof by now. We've got the human genome sorted, we've got DNA sorted. If a small piece of dead flesh falls from me today in the room where we're sitting, in a couple of 100 years' time, they'll know I was here. Forensics will be able to find that out. But today we still can't find the gay gene, because I don't believe there is one.
I've heard that from a few different places, but that still seems to be a really common thinking. And part of that is validated by the removal of homosexuality from the DSM. Do you know anything about the history of that? I
do. I mean, back in 1973, so this is shortly after the Stonewall riots in the late 1960s, and a very clear but covert agenda by members of the gay community that wasn't necessarily known as the gay community in those days. But there was a realisation that psychology and psychiatry would need to change, and change dramatically, so that homosexuality was no longer seen as a disorder. The challenge becomes this, is you use the word disorder and people say you're wrong and other people therefore right. In some way all of our lives, to some extent, are disordered. What happened in 1973 is that a small group of psychologists and psychiatrists within the APA, commonly now known as the Gay PA, for that small group, managed to persuade the president at the time, Robert Spitzer, among other people, to remove homosexuality from the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual number 4, I think it was at the time. That was removed, but it was not removed for scientific and factual reason. It was removed based on emotions and feelings, and really on lobbying. That's why I think today we are seeing a lot of mental anguish and anxiety still existing within the gay community, because we're not providing ways for people to be able to bring that into a therapeutic, into a counselling, into a healing or restorative situation, and to sit with that and say, what's really going on for you? This ban in some way on all forms of therapy that dares to allow sexuality to be examined, I think is detrimental, because in some ways it says leave your sexuality or sexual feeling outside of the therapeutic situation. Well, no offence, but in any therapeutic situation, the whole person must be brought in, irrespective of what their sexuality or their sexual identity or their sexual attraction might be. So I think overall, if we're not careful, there's a limited few that is creating a setting that is an incredible injustice to people who experience same-sex attraction and to those also who are gender questioning.
Yeah, I was actually just listening to a video this morning, and one of the head of the American College of Pediatricians was speaking, and she mentioned how around 20 years ago she had a case where a young boy was identifying as a girl, and she spoke with the parents and referred them to a therapist, and through a process of time, at one point the boy stopped and he said, "My parents don't love me when I'm a boy, they only love me when I am a girl." And basically what had happened was when he was 3, they had another child, and this child actually had a disability. And so all of that attention was poured into this disabled baby. So now there's that wound that this child carries. Very good parents, very loving parents.
Absolutely.
But has this wound and is now confused. But because of good therapy, they were able to come to terms, actually my parents do love me as a boy, I really am a boy. It's just that thought. And she described how now today, if that parent went to most pediatricians, they would be immediately shuffled to a gender identity specialist. And I think that injustice you spoke of
Yes.
is what is taking place, and it's incredible to me how many professionals actually know about it, but they're scared to speak about it.
This is what we're now dealing with, is in some way we have a very, very loud and vocal minority who use something called jamming, and jamming means that if you dare to question one side of an argument, then therefore there's something wrong with you. Of course, the good thing about any healthy debate is there may well be truths on both sides, but they all need to be able to come to the surface and to be tested. And that's what we're preventing from happening often today. I have a number of cases of, mostly from grandparents who come to me about children who think they're the wrong gender. And as we've looked at what's gone over time, and as the affirmation of the true gender, the biological gender has taken place, often that child has transitioned through. I mention grandparents because it's often grandparents who come and speak to me about their transgender grandchild. The parents don't, because the parents and their own formation or lack of formation has been part of some of the challenging development, let's put it that way, of the child, and why the child is now beginning to question who they are. When the parents get the necessary and the appropriate attention and focus on their own journey, then what happens is often things begin to change for the child. This is not about blaming anybody. It's never about blaming, but it is about daring to look beneath the surface and to give time and space and energy to allow, in a sense, things to begin to level out. It's the only way I can put it. You know, I recall vividly a journey of one man who I walked alongside in London. And, you know, it took him over 4 years for him and his boyfriend to come to a realisation that really they were really good friends, just that they were having sex with each other. And they didn't want to lose the friendship, but actually the sex was getting in the way of that good friendship. It took them 4 years to come to a point of saying, what are we doing to each other? When they stopped being sexual with one another, their friendship took off in a whole new way. And it's just like, wow, this is incredible. Now, it's very difficult once that sexual boundary has been crossed to sometimes be able to establish a healthy boundary. But because they were both willing to walk a spiritual journey and to look for a help and assistance beyond themselves, an eternal help, they were able to do that. And it was just wonderful watching these two guys really having just a deeper understanding of love, a deeper understanding of friendship, and to watching some of their own struggles and challenges deep inside themselves find resolution. That to me is good news. And I believe that everybody should have the opportunity to hear about it, to have the opportunity to choose that, and to at least be able to walk the journey and see what it looks like for them. If it doesn't work, nothing lost in some way or other. The challenge today becomes is we are literally cutting off every avenue for people to have that opportunity. And therefore there's one agenda or one agenda only, which means people having their free will taken away from them. They're being told you have no choice. That in itself brings about despair deep within the human person.
So in a sense, people are being sold a lie when they believe they're born that way that stops them from actually examining what are the other possible reasons. for feeling the way that I feel.
That's right. I mean, I'd say this, and because the whole subject of sexuality is so delicate and it's so intrinsic to who we are and how we perceive ourselves in the world around us, is, I know that for myself, much of what I experienced in the confusion in my own sexual identity went back to those earlier stages of my life, time that I didn't remember and couldn't understand. Back to around my birth, and in some cases a small part of it within the womb itself. So it's understandable why I thought I was born gay, and that's why I preach that message, because it's all I've ever known. That's why we need to be able to take our temporal lives and to place them in the midst of eternity, where an eternal light can be shone, so that we can see the pockets where there's darkness, and we can gain the understanding of the uniqueness of each of our journeys and how in some way that we can be restored. Now, some people do that through spirituality. Some people do it really well through therapy. So it's not a question of, you've got to be this God squad person like that. Although I would say this, people who are willing to walk a spiritual journey tend to get well more quickly. It's very true of 12 steps as well. When people acknowledge that they are powerless and they need to look beyond themselves for help, then they can begin to get well. This is why pride, in a sense, is one of the first walls that needs to come down. Once the pride comes down, there's a recognition I'm dependent on others, and maybe I need to be dependent on others that otherwise I wouldn't want to be dependent upon, or may otherwise not go to. That's when things begin to change in our lives.
Well, I just love your story, James. I love how God's worked in your life.
I love how God's worked in I never expected to be where I am today. And I start and I always finish by saying I'm a work in progress. I don't know where I'll be tomorrow, but I know this. I love the fact that my depression's gone down. I love the fact that my self-harming has stopped. I love the fact that I have respect not just for myself, but for others. My self-respect's gone up. My disrespect has gone down, if you like. My sense of dignity is constantly rising. My appreciation for myself and of others is rising. I want for everybody to know this. I'm not against anybody. I'm not. In the message I try and bring to others, I just say to people, there's more, and it's good stuff. Don't miss it.
That's great. Thanks so much, James.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for being with me today.